Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this session of Justice in Action. My name is Tess Summer, and I'm with the Joseph Stern Center for Social Responsibility at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. If this is your first time joining us, Justice in Action is a weekly conversation series with the JCC Social Justice Activist in Residence, Ruth Messenger, and New York City Councilmember Brad Lander. Each week, we meet to discuss a different social justice issue and the way that it's being exacerbated by COVID-19. This week, we're joined by Deborah Axt, co-executive director of Make the Road New York, and Nuala O'Doherty-Naranjo, creator of the COVID Care Neighborhood Network. They'll be discussing how the Queens immigrant communities have been impacted by this crisis, what kind of support the communities are receiving or not receiving, and what needs to be done to address the issue. If you have any questions throughout the session, you can, if you put your cursor on the screen where you see my face speaking, go down to the chat button. You can type any questions throughout and we'll get to it at some point in time, anything at all. And Nuala should be joining us shortly. She's not here yet, but I will let Ruth take it away.
Okay, guys, first of all, welcome to all of you who are back with us. We're delighted. I want to just do one or two quick housekeeping notions. Justice in Action will continue every week for the time being and for as long at least as we are sheltered in place with me and Councilmember Brad Lander. And because we're now past some of the Jewish holidays, we expect it to be regularly on Thursdays at 2 p.m. and to announce our topics in advance. Someone wrote in to ask if the sessions are being recorded, and the answer is they are. And you will be able to access the recording through the Center for Social Responsibility at the JCC. And you will also, if you sign into this meeting, if you come into this meeting, you will get a follow-up email that talks about the issues that we discussed and some particular actions that you can take. You may have noticed that I have my two guests, and I don't have my co-host because Councilmember Lander is, like many elected officials, a life I know and remember well, pulled between doing this radio show and the fact that the City Council is holding a really important hearing. I think the particular hearing right now is about the city's plan, which they are or are not implementing in a timely way, to find hotel rooms or other shelter spaces for people who are test positive for the virus or at high risk of testing positive for the virus, who are in homeless shelters, which is obviously one of the dangerous breeding grounds. So it's a very important council hearing. He has to wait his turn. He will be with us before too long, and we'll try to carry on until he does. The topic for today could be very, 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 very broad because it's about immigrants in New York City, but we decided to focus in on the Queens community specifically, because it is the center. I guess Nuala and Deb will tell me their best guesses, but it certainly is the center for immigration and diverse populations in New York City. I suspect it is probably the most diverse county in the United States. That would be my personal guess. And I want to say one other thing before we start. So we're focusing in on the Queens story, but you also have the opportunity here, and I hope neither of my guests is insulted by this, but having like a different notion, an example of the difference in size response that often exists in the not-for-profit world. Because for all of what Deb would like to be bigger and bigger and bigger, Make the Road is a large national organization. Make the Road New York is a sizable and powerful New York organization. And Nuala is like many, 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 many of us, and probably Make the Road at the very beginning, someone who has really started an organization in and of her community. So I'm going to go first to Nuala and then to Deb. And I'd just like you to, Nuala, in each case, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this particular business, however you want to define it, something about the work you were doing before the pandemic, and something about the impact of the pandemic. So take 4 or 5 minutes and try to sort of give us a broad introduction, and then we'll go to Deb to do the same thing.
Sure. So my name's Nuala O'Doherty-Naranjo. I live here in Jackson Heights, Queens. I was a lawyer for 23 years, working in the criminal justice system, but I was a long time volunteer in the community. I ran a group called the Jackson Heights Beautification Group, which is the largest and oldest civics group here in Jackson Heights. And then in January, I started to run for public office here, to run for New York State Assembly. And in the middle of collecting petitions, the pandemic started. And I had this group of all these volunteers, and we immediately turned our focus on to helping our neighbors. So we started something called COVID Care Neighbor Network, which is a mutual aid group of, we have almost 400 people have signed up either to volunteer to help or who need help. And we've now started basically a food pantry here in Jackson Heights. We have a group of volunteers who just man phones every day, and we take probably between 50 and 100 calls a day, and we're just trying to do 4 different things. We match up people, so we match up people who need help with people who can help, and those people usually can pay for their own help. It's just a matter of not being able to go outside. Then we do what we call just reassuring calls, check in on people who need help. And then we do legal services. We try to help them with whether it's power of attorneys or those kind of things. And then lastly, we started doing food aid, so people who couldn't pay for groceries. And unfortunately, that has just ballooned, and that's become probably 90% of our work now, which is straight out food deliveries for people who can't afford food. So what we've done now is we've kind of set up this whole network of volunteers helping other volunteers. So it's 100% volunteers. We partner with Together We Can, an existing non-for-profit, to collect donations. And we've been pretty successful in collecting donations. Our biggest problem is we don't know how long this is going to go on for. And we didn't want to get into the food pantry business, but we were just responding to this emergency need. And we've been very lucky in that we have such a diverse neighborhood. So we have volunteers who speak English, Spanish, Bengali, Nepali, and we're just addressing the need of the community so far.
What happened to your campaign for state assembly?
So the campaign for state assembly is going to get back on once we kind of get through this emergency state. As you know, we can't go out and meet and greet. So normal politics is suspended for now, and I hope to get back to it soon.
Okay. So I just want to say to everyone who's listening, this is I didn't actually know the whole story and know how recent it was, but this is a fantastic story of how grassroots projects get started. And sometimes they operate, for the time that they're needed most, this life of this pandemic, however long that is. And sometimes they become established organizations in their communities and grow to provide a range of services over a longer period of time. But it's one of the strengths of New York City that we do manage to keep having wonderful people like Nuala and her universe of activists and volunteers who simply want to find a way to be helpful and who come together to do that. Deb, you have a longer story to tell, so why don't you leap in? And if you can, give everybody some statistics about Queens as a borough, it would be great.
Okay, I don't have major statistics in front of me, but I'll see what I can find right now. New York.
Let me just say, my memory from when I was in New York City politics is that there are 200 different languages spoken in New York City, and they're all spoken in Queens. So
that sounds right. And I do believe it is the most diverse neighborhood in the world. And so, as you can imagine, and as you've heard on the news, it is really the epicenter of the epicenter right now. Make New York is representing about 25,000 members, the majority of whom live in Queens. We are really an organization that works across downstate New York, but Queens is our highest density. And most of our members depend on Elmhurst Hospital, which I'm sure you all have heard stories about in the news. And since the very first few days of the crisis really cresting here in New York, it was clear that Elmhurst was not positioned by any of our healthcare system to really meet the need that grew fast in Queens. And what we've seen in Queens is, of course, horrific. It is heartbreaking that many of us are able to stay home and work from home, but most of our members are not. And so most of them are either on the front lines working in essential jobs, cleaning offices so that the rest of us can work from home, doing the laundry for the hospital, of course, also doing nursing and other actual healthcare jobs, working in the Amazon warehouses, doing delivery. And those folks are facing some pretty horrific conditions. even the Amazon warehouses are incredibly undersupplied with PPE. And so all of what you hear about on the news is true, and then some. You probably can look around and see the delivery workers wearing plastic bags on their hands and bandanas across their faces, because that's really all of the protective equipment they get. And we do know that the pressure on these essential workers to work faster, harder, longer hours is making it impossible for folks to really follow sanitizing methods and recommendations. And so the workplaces are getting really, really dangerous. And then what we're seeing, of course, is that people get sick. And once they get sick, they either stop working or try to keep working, are expected to go home and shelter in place, are expected not to be out and about, but really have no way to live. And so in the early days of this crisis, we were focusing largely on, we have a health hotline and a team of about 25 people on that health team that are helping folks to navigate, figure out how they can access testing, how they can get into a hospital if they really need one, and then being in constant contact with hundreds of families who are dealing with really dangerous conditions, who are dealing with the coronavirus infections in their homes, and desperately trying to keep one person from infecting the others, desperately trying to keep people from needing to go out for groceries or to find work. But as you may have heard, the stimulus packages at the federal level, the CARES Act, all explicitly exclude anyone who's an undocumented immigrant and anyone who has filed with an ITIN instead of a social security number for their taxes from unemployment insurance and from the tax rebates. And so if folks in Queens in our membership, many of whom are undocumented, or at least have undocumented breadwinners within the family, if they are unable to work, either because their workplace is shut down or because they have become too sick to be out at work, they have zero access to income. And that is creating a crisis unlike anything that we've seen in the neighborhood.
So that's any family with an undocumented?
Well, it's a tiny bit more complex than that, but no undocumented workers, no workers without work authorization can ever get unemployment insurance, regardless of how many hours they've worked into the system, how many taxes they've paid into the system, right? And then Congress also explicitly excluded ITIN filers, which are folks who don't yet have access to a social security number, though they've been paying taxes, excluded them from getting the $1,200 tax rebate. So the crisis around no income coming into families is really exacerbating the health crisis, because people cannot afford to stay home with zero income, right? They can't afford to stay home and not go out and get food. And so the program that Nuala has been setting up and others like that have been playing a critical role in Queens, trying to get food into people's homes, enable people to stay home and follow the social distancing guidelines despite this income crisis. But needless to say, the income crisis is growing, and people have already missed April rent. They're about to miss May rent. There is an eviction on moratoriums that we fought to win, but everyone knows that shortly the eviction moratorium will be lifted, and they will have a balloon payment due on their past rent. So we're on the verge of tens of thousands of families in Queens becoming homeless if that eviction moratorium is lifted, and the sense of panic in the community with no income is growing. The health.
So this will be an area in which there might be some public action for people to take to protect people from evictions, but also to think about the city's responsibility to small landlords.
Yes, absolutely. So we can talk more about other topics related. I mean, the health system is, of course, continues to be overburdened. It has leveled out a little bit, but the situation is still in a crisis state. For a long time, we've been working to stay in contact with hundreds of families who have loved ones in the hallways of hospitals because they couldn't get admitted to a room. And then, of course, it's really easy to lose contact with your loved ones even once they have a room, if someone's cell phone dies, there's no way to reach them. They often can't communicate, can't speak. And then the last couple of weeks we pivoted and trained our team, who's on the phone with thousands of families every week, trained them to help people find bodies. And you have 14 days to claim your loved one. Otherwise, they end up, the situation is changing a little bit, but they end up at a risk of being in a mass grave. And so our case management work has pivoted from providing food, health guidelines and support, navigating the healthcare system, to providing support to people who either have someone who have died in the home and the body needs to be collected, or finding bodies and making sure that they're able to give their loved one some sort of proper treatment after they pass. There is, certainly great news like Nuala's work, and we have started also a $1.5 million fund to get cash directly to families. So there are sources that are helping to address the food crisis. We're now fighting on the federal and state level, especially, to figure out what we can do about workers and families who are excluded from any relief, and therefore in a crisis desperation situation right now.
Okay, I'm gonna stop so we can switch back and forth. I want to say to listeners, I'm aware sometimes when we do these programs, when we talked about the impact of the virus on Rikers population, talking about immigrants in Queens, there's a lot of information coming at you very quickly, because many of us, and Deb alluded to this, who are coping with all kinds of challenges, from Zooming meetings to homeschooling children to being in quite close quarters with a lot of people, understandably don't necessarily know what it's like for a whole bunch of other people in our own city, in our own borough, sometimes in our own neighborhood, whose problems in general are somewhat more complicated and more demanding than ours, but as Nuala and Deb were just indicating, have, in the response to this pandemic, suddenly run into a universe of new problems, from food, I was going to say food insecurity, but as Nuala said, it's actually more dire than that, to literally lack of food, to lack of adequate health care. And so we know that we're hitting you with a lot of information. Feel free to kind of pick up on what you can take out of it. And those of you who are really committed, it's one of the reasons that we're recording the session, so you can go back and listen, because frankly, while we will give you a bunch of action steps at the end and in the follow-up email, one of the things from the point of view of Councilmember Lander and myself that's most useful for you to do is to tell other people what you heard and what you learned, because there are too many people who aren't quite focused on this issue right now. Somebody has kindly written in to tell me that there are 637 languages and dialects spoken in New York City. So I thought I was up to speed on our diversity, but I was far behind. And Nuala, three things. One is, we're all intrigued by the fact that you are in a car, and we hope you're not driving.
No, not driving.
Okay. Someone asked if you could tell us how you assess the needs of the community. And then I'd also like to talk about how your new effort, to the extent to which you know about Make the Road New York, to the extent to which you're beginning to build some connections.
Sure. So we've been able to make a lot of connections. Because I had worked with all the local schools, I'm a member of the Community Education Council, I had already a network in the neighborhood, and that was really important. So that connection already existed. So I'd run a volunteer organization before, so I had a large group of volunteers. The question is, how do you find the families that are really in need? And I have found that once you've been in one basement, you kind of get led to the next basement and the next basement. I think I've been to almost every basement here in Queens now. Because those are the people who really need the help. Those who are the ones who are forgotten. The first week or two was people who were just waiting for their unemployment check, and we can deal with that need. The real need that I think we have to focus on are the people who have no job, no money, and no hope of either. So they're not going to get unemployment checks. They're not going to get stimulus checks, and there's not going to be any work anytime soon. And they need a long-term solution. So they're surviving right now because they didn't pay April and May rent, but they're not going to survive much longer. They also are the same group that are facing the most, what we call, not just not paying the rent, but the harassment most people think when you think of canceling rent that you're going to be, not paying some landlord that you mail a check to. But most people I'm dealing with are renting rooms. And so they live with the landlord. So they share the bathroom and the kitchen with that person. When you don't pay that person, it gets really ugly quickly. And a lot of them are facing harassment. So there's a big education that needs to be made to tell people that if you rent a room, you're a tenant just like anyone else, and that you get tenant protections and that they can't kick you out just because you didn't pay. And they also can't harass you. They can't turn off the gas. They can't turn off the hot water. They can't deny you access to the bathroom or the kitchen. So there needs to be that education to say that you have rights just like any other tenant if you rent a room, because most of these families are living off the fact that they're not paying rent. And the food insecurity is only going to grow, and we've got to figure out a way to do this long term. I personally think that we need to do, like they have pandemic unemployment, have pandemic SNAP. The city needs to step up and say, we're going to offer food stamps to families who don't have Social Security numbers just during this pandemic period. And that way they have an access to actually shop for themselves. Unfortunately, the city's response for too long has been to make prepared meals. But if you have a group of 11 people living in a basement apartment, just meals, prepared meals for one day would be 33 meals. That's crazy. It's much more efficient and better for the family to give them rice, beans, and oil so they can cook for themselves rather than going to a local school and picking up 33 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So I think we need to figure out a way to get cash assistance to these undocumented families just to cover meal expenses. And it would just be basically food stamps for undocumented during the pandemic. I think that's the real crisis, is not to have them harassed by their landlords and to get a way for them to be able to pay for their food.
Okay, so Nuala and Deb each said something, but I'm going to ask them to come back and explain it to you a little more. Nuala talked about having been in every basement. They're each talking to you about how people live. So I want all of the people who are listening, and I'm going to assume that some of the people who are listening own their own apartments, and many of the people who are listening rent apartments, and you've rented for a long time, and you've dealt with some of the good things in the rent protection laws in New York City and rent control, rent stabilization laws, and you've dealt with some of the challenges. Some of you have probably had the experience of landlords who, out of their own whatever, economic insecurity, I'll say, end up harassing tenants, end up misrepresenting the law, trying to push people out. But I think most of you do not know how a large number of people, many of them undocumented workers, live. And so when you say something, and then Deb, would you pick up and both of you talk about what you mean by being in basements?
So unfortunately here in Jackson Heights, Corona, and East Elmhurst, it's mainly the 1 and 2 family houses. They've all usually rented out their basements. The basements are usually chopped up into little rooms, and each little room is an independent family. They usually have a shared bathroom and a shared kitchen. And they rent their room from someone who lives in that house. So a person rents an apartment and they rent out each individual room. So the person who rents the apartment then is a landlord to the people they rent the rooms to. And they're the ones trying to now evict the person who rents the bedroom because they didn't pay the rent. And it doesn't even occur to them that these same rent laws apply to them. And if they want to evict a person, they have to go to landlord and tenant court. So whether it's a basement room or if you're renting the back bedroom of an apartment, those people are tenants and they have rights. And a lot of people don't think of it that way. And we really need to do an education campaign on both ends. One, that those tenants have rights. And two, the people renting that bedroom are landlords and must behave appropriately.
Deb, do you want to add to that? You're muted.
That's an excellent overview. I think the other thing that we see happening a lot is just small apartments with multiple generations living together, which of course is a totally adequate and helpful way to live, though folks are poor in good times, is a horror show right now. If you have some of the workers going out, some of the adults going out to work in delivery jobs and healthcare jobs and coming home to a very jammed apartment with no possibility of people self-isolating. And so that's really the situation that we're in. And many folks also who end up in the hospital, needless to say, once people are well enough to not need to be on a ventilator, are generally sent home. even if you need oxygen, the hospitals are sending people home with an oxygen tank. And so going home when you're still that highly ill, in need of care, to a crowded multi-generational family home is of course a health disaster. So,
but I just want to remind our listeners, some of whom have loyally been with us every week. Last week when we talked about domestic violence, we were talking about domestic violence being on the increase because there are couples, one of whom may have a track record as an abuser, but may not. One of whom may not have such a track record, but when two people, even two people trying to maintain a great relationship, are all of a sudden together 24/7 in very small space, all kinds of things can happen. There's a note in the New York Times today about the number of apartments in New York City, and they're not beginning to talk about your basements, but the vast number of apartments in New York City that have less than 400 square feet. Fewer than 400 square feet. But again, I want people to focus on the description of the basement, because I think it's not a piece of New York City that people are really aware of. It is the way in which people live. It is the way in which people who come to this city for work find a place to live. But imagine an apartment with multi-generational family. I mean, not an apartment, I'm sorry, a basement with a couple of rooms, multi-generational family, which functions in one way. And just repeating what Nuala and Deb have said to you all, when people are going in and out to work and in and out to school and sort of have staggered hours and begin to know the schedules, and now all of a sudden they're all in that space. So for those of you who are dealing with the realities, sometimes the benefits, but a lot of the challenges of quote unquote sheltering in place in New York City apartments, we don't begin to understand what it's like to be in that small, a confined space in a basement with other people living in other related rooms and whatever. Okay, we're going to take a non-commercial break to welcome Councilmember Lander and Brad. Just bring us up to speed on, forget what we're talking about for a minute, bring us up to speed on the City Council.
Thank you, Ruth, and Deb and Nuala. It's so good to see both of you, and I'm just so grateful for the work you are doing, both in your neighborhood and like all our compassion to what's taken place there, and then for immigrant families in general. Yeah, I'm sorry to be late, but we had yesterday our first city council meeting of this era, our first Zoom council meeting, and we introduced a lot of legislation trying to address it. I'm proud to be supporting an essential workers bill of rights that we'll talk about in a future session. And then we just had a hearing that's underway now that I just asked my questions in, really trying to get at homelessness and pushing the administration to make more hotel rooms available, both for New Yorkers who are on the street and for those who are in those congregate men's shelters where physical distancing is just impossible. So we're pushing, and I'm glad the council's back at work. It's just a critical time. So I'm glad to join this conversation. I cheered mightily earlier in the week when Make the Road and Deb's team started pushing at the state level for serious resources to immigrant New Yorkers who have been left out of the federal bailout. Just like that, to me, there's so many heartbreaking parts of this crisis, but the idea that because Donald Trump was elected president and the Republicans are a bunch of xenophobes, that we would shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, I guess just immigrant New Yorkers who have been paying taxes and working hard by the millions will be left out of unemployment insurance, of aid, of stimulus. Like, it's gross, and there's so many offensive parts of this crisis and the inequities it's exposing. But the idea that we would just like let that one sit at the state or city level and like shrug and abide by what the xenophobe in chief says is especially galling. So I'm grateful for the work that you're doing. We're going to push at the council level to do all we can there. And I'm glad to be back.
And Brad, since you're our legislator in chief here, Nuala was talking about particularly how virtually all of the work of her organization has ended up shifting toward food and hunger.
Yeah.
And she said that we should be thinking about a city or city-state pandemic SNAP program. In other words, giving people food benefits.
So, I mean, I will say this is one area. I've got a lot of criticisms of where the administration has fallen short. Food is one area where a lot has been and is still being done. And there's still a long way to go. But, we put, the mayor announced a $170 million food program, which includes $25 million for food pantries who, you know, like have been experiencing just massive numbers of people coming. We talked a couple of weeks ago about a few of those places, and I've been back since then to the Must Be a shelter, which is just overrun every day. So, and then the administration is working hard to stand up a program for homebound seniors to be able to get, well, actually, one other thing that is working, you know, this program where anyone who wants to can go and get 3 meals a day from the schools is not perfect, but I don't know other cities that are offering it, and I haven't heard of anyone being turned away. Now, there's people who can't go out, and getting home delivered meals to homebound seniors has proved harder. They are trying to stand up a program, and one of the settlement houses I talked to said, well, that program is working like 80%. And on the one hand, that means out of like 100 people they had tried to put in, 80 people who hadn't been connected to city food before were getting it, but it also meant 20% of people were counting on the city for a meal they didn't get, and obviously that has to be fixed. So I'm glad to hear, Nuala, things we should, you know, ways that, you know, where that's missing and how we target it. And we'll definitely have to do more, and more money is going to be needed because this crisis is going to be going on a long time. I don't know that we could do something like a city level SNAP, but substantial increases in city level emergency food are absolutely critical.
So Nuala, Deb, what else do you think is needed? You get to talk to Brad about that as well.
Well, I think we need a lot of clarification for renters. I know that they can't be evicted, but can landlords be using this to charge late fees? Can landlords be using this as future ways to evict them because they haven't paid rent or were late in paying rent? And in July, are all these families now going to be to housing court facing evictions? Clearly, we need rent cancellation. But if we can't get rent cancellation, can at least we get some assurances for these people that this pandemic is not going to be held against them for their future rent? This is not going to be months and months now of eviction proceedings. Yeah.
That's a great and critical question. You know, the legislation to do it right, that has to take place at the state level. And whether that's Senator Ginaris's bill that would cancel rent for people who are affected by the COVID crisis and as a result can't pay, and actually is pretty thoughtful, and then how to give assistance as well to that building owner if that means they can't meet their mortgage. That would be the best way to do it, in my opinion. I support that bill. I'd like to see it done. You're right that if that's not done, and the governor has obviously kind of, you know, made it clear he doesn't want the legislators legislating at all, so they got to get back in session and start pushing. There'd be other things they could do, just like what you said in terms of late fees. The council unfortunately is preempted by state law from doing a lot around housing. But one of my colleagues did find a kind of clever way to get involved on this yesterday, basically by essentially kind of suspending the licenses of all the marshals for a year. So we are like taking the steps we can, or trying to take the steps we can in the council to make sure that people don't get evicted, because if you can't hire a marshal, then you're not going to be able to evict your tenants. That's obviously a kind of stopgap measure. What's needed is the kind of clarity you're talking about. We need the legislature to get back in session, to have the guts to like push back at Governor Cuomo and say, we have to like negotiate about a lot of things, including that immigrant cash assistance, including a better approach to renters. So I think hopefully we'll push in the council. Maybe if the landlords see us like suspending all the licenses of the marshals, they'll be like, all right, it'd be better to have at least a coherent answer from the state. But I think it's going to just take continued organizing, which is so hard to do from our Zoom boxes, but is going to continue to be what's necessary.
Yeah, Deb, do you want to browbeat Brad a little bit?
Oh man, if I were in the position to browbeat Brad, that would be great. No, Brad is working really closely with us to figure out how we can be creative at the city level, and then push at the state and federal level. And obviously those are critical things to do. At the city level, there's less ability to raise revenues. And so of course we need to continue to fight at the federal level. It is outrageous that our senators and representatives in Congress have so easily just said, oh, so sorry, it's not realistic to include immigrants when we're talking about folks in this level of crisis and desperation. And so then we're also, I'm going to put in the chat a petition that has an overview of the fund that we called for starting this Monday that Brad was mentioning. So we're calling for a fund at the state level that would give, basically it would work as a sort of simplified version of unemployment insurance. So it would be a flat rate, no need to calculate benefits based on someone's own actual salary, a flat rate based on what another low wage worker who is eligible for unemployment would typically be getting. So that's $750 a week right now. So we're calling for a $3.5 billion fund at the state level that can meet that need on the assumption that Congress will continue to fail. So that's, I think, a critical piece that would get a meaningful income stream into the pocket of folks. We're simultaneously calling for cancellation of rent. Obviously, there's different mechanisms and ways that make that complicated, but that's another really important route to supporting people is minimizing the expenses that are pulling people into crisis.
Okay, that's
So,
very
Brad,
helpful. Go ahead, Nuala.
The first and the most obvious one is the New York City must include the cremation burial expense for people without papers. The fact that we're not cremating New Yorkers who died here of COVID just seems crazy, that families are facing burials in Potter's Field rather than the simple $900 cremation expense. That's number one. Number two would be some kind of food stamp programs for undocumented, whether it's through the SNAP system or just independently from the city issuing kind of food stamps like the old paper ones that could be brought to farmers markets or cashed in by local supermarkets. And three, the opening up of city streets, the Corey Johnson idea of 70 or 75 miles of city streets so that our families who are cooped up in small apartments can finally get out and children can run, kids can ride bikes and families can stroll, as well as emergency workers and essential workers can have a safe way to ride to work rather than being forced onto crowded subways. The last one I want is I'd love to see every high schooler be given a city bike membership. I think biking is obviously the easiest way to have some kind of exercise and keep social distancing. It's almost impossible to ride a bike and break social distancing laws. But I'm really worried as a mother of 3 teenagers about having kids cooped up in small apartments for 6 months without any exercise. And I think City Bike would be the easiest way to do it and just give every high school kid in New York City a City Bike account.
Wow. Brad, that'll keep you busy for a year or so. At the risk of moralizing, I'm going to come back and just say to all of you, you're not asking a lot of questions in the chat room, and there are a lot of you on this call, and I'm wondering if that's because we're overwhelming you with information. But I think it's important that people start learning and understanding what else is going on in the city. And I want to remind you, which I think you know, but that the people that Deborah and Nuala are talking about, and the people that Brad says are the focus of some city council work, are the people who are working on our behalf. When they have a job, those are the people who are packing food in warehouses, who are doing delivery, who are part of the gig economy, who are, riding a bike and doing delivery. And so our lives and some of the level of comfort that some of us are able to maintain, even while we're sheltered in place, is on the backs of a lot of people who are doing work in less than safe conditions and without personal protective equipment. And many of those people are now unemployed because of the shutdown of small businesses and restaurants, and their inability to literally feed themselves and their families or stay safe in their housing is a problem for everyone in New York.
So, Ruth, 2 things. First, I think there are 2 people that have their hands raised of attendees to ask questions. So we can,
okay.
They didn't put it in the chat, but we could real quickly, though, on the worker issues, which you just mentioned, I'll just let you know that, well, first, Nuala, there is a bill that Carlina Rivera introduced, and I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of, that was introduced in the council yesterday to try to force the mayor's hands on opening up the streets, and that'll be heard, I think, tomorrow, and we'll certainly keep pushing on it. This Essential Worker Bill of Rights package that I'm proposing really gets, Ruth, at some of the issues you were just talking about. It would mandate paid sick leave for gig workers, for DoorDash food delivery folks, or Uber and Lyft drivers, which they have not previously had, but there's no reason they shouldn't have. It would provide whistleblower and unfair firing protections to all essential workers, like the folks that Deb's been working with at Amazon, like Chris Smalls, who got fired for speaking out, or some of those doctors and healthcare workers who have spoken out in their hospitals. And then we're also proposing kind of premium pay, a bonus pay, hazard pay for essential workers who are paid low wages in big companies, but still out there having to work right now. So we can talk more about that in a future session, but I'm glad we got there. But yeah, we got.
Although I just would add for everybody, this is not exactly parallel in New York, but when you hear about some of the places that these quote unquote essential workers are working, I mean, even starting with the hospitals where there's not enough protective equipment, but certainly going to some of these packing establishments, it's just worth noting that it's now turning out nationally that one of the new hotspots for the virus is in places, frankly, that none of us have ever heard of, that are relatively small towns in Midwestern states that happen to have things like a meat packing plant.
Yep. Where
people are suddenly like thrown together, working literally hand in hand, and where the virus spreads very rapidly. Nuala, we got an interesting question through the chat box, which is people who are undocumented, if they show up to get a free meal at a school, the impression of the questioner is that they basically get a meal. If they were to show up to apply for a food stamp program, they'd have to give all their information. And if they're not documented, they might be unwilling to do that. I think it's a question.
Sure. So this is the issue. It's fine for twice a week to go in and feed your family of 5 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, a granola bar, and milk. But the reality is that families have been cooped up for months, over a month now, in these small apartments. And there's nothing more reassuring than the smell of lunch cooking, the smell of dinner cooking. Families want to eat like a family. They want to sit around a table and have rice and beans and vegetables. They don't want to open up a plastic bag and have a peanut butter sandwich. So that's fine for an emergency for 1 or 2 days a week. But the reality is families need rice, milk, eggs. They need to cook. They need to be normal. And it's not only good for mental health, but also just for the family cohesion to have this meal together. So I think the city needs to rethink how they're feeding these families. Look, if it's one person living alone, we have prepared meals they can eat in a microwave. That's fine. But that doesn't work for 5, 6, 10. A lot of the families we're living to are 11 people.
I think everybody understands your argument in favor of food rather than peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. The specific question was, in order to get something like a regular SNAP program with financial aid for food, would you have to fill out information that would put your immigration status in danger? And
right.
it's a good question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it's the same issue we have with the New York City ID. So there has to be some faith in the city, and it would be a city-run program, not a state or federal program, that the city would protect these immigrants. So just like we offer city ID, that we would offer a program where we would say we will not turn this information over to federal authorities. And that's why it would have to be city-funded, not federally or state-funded.
And I'll just add here, and I don't really disagree, but I will say that part of the reason why we put a lot of money toward the food pantries is that really is what they're doing right now. Like Masbia is normally a place where you go and for a hot meal, if you need one, but they've converted their whole operation. They obviously can't do hot meals, and they've converted to being a food pantry, trying to get the staples to families who need it. And you don't need to give information there, but they just have had so much more demand in recent weeks than they ever had before. And, and I was on the line kind of checking people in. It was overwhelmingly people who had never been before, and they're kind of known as a kosher food pantry, but maybe like 1 in 10 of the people wanted kosher food and 9 in 10 were immigrants, basically. So that is, it is worth recognizing that like what we do, if we provide cash to non-immigrant families through unemployment assistance and stimulus checks that let them go to the store and buy food, and don't provide that at all to immigrant families, then yes, we are going to have to find a way to get them food if we want them to be able to eat. So, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
There's a question in the Q&A for Deb. It's about the Open Society grant program. There was this announcement of Soros providing some money for a range of things, including for undocumented people. Are you guys involved in that? Do you get any of that money? How is that money being distributed? What can you tell us?
So we don't know the details of how it's been distributed. It's, of course, a really generous foundation grant, as foundation grants go for sure. So we're really grateful, and we work a lot with the Open Society Foundation folks. They're great. It is in the details are being worked out. Make the Road is going to be one of the entities that's going to help distribute those resources. It's just nowhere near enough. Right. The plan that I know of for distribution of that money is similar to similar funds that have cropped up across the country. And it's about one-time cash checks that are not going to do anything close to helping people pay rent and buy groceries and take care of their other core needs. And so we must do repeat payments like unemployment insurance that the rest of us are able to get. We all know living on unemployment insurance is no easy task in and of itself. Those are like poverty level wage replacements, but we have to at least make sure that everyone among us gets those poverty level wage replacements so that people can survive. And so that's what we're fighting for. And, you know, when we said we need $3.5 billion, people said, that's unreasonable. I'm sorry, we're in a position where we have to be unreasonable. I mean, the amount of money that's been given away to bail out the airlines and other sectors is enormous. $3.5 billion is not actually a large amount of money when we're talking about income replacement that enables people to survive at this time, that enables people to stay home rather than risk spreading the virus themselves. So that's what we're going to continue to fight for.
Well said. Deb, can I take just a quick step back before we start running out of time? Can you just go back to the sort of pre-pandemic life of Make the Road for a minute? Because I know you guys were, you know, had a thriving physical center, were interested in building space for people to come. Just give people a quick picture of that before we wallow in the, you can only talk to people on Zoom.
I miss our spaces because our community centers are these colorful mural covered centers where people come in for English classes and meetings and to meet with an attorney and for after school. And we come together and learn and grow and eat together and then go back out to fight for a better world and fight for the systemic changes that our communities need. So now we're doing all of that by phone and by Zoom. And we had 100 of our leaders across the state come together last night for a Zoom strategy session on how to demand that the legislature come back to session in Albany next week to address critical needs. And we had a meeting with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that 40,000 people joined. And we're doing every Tuesday and Thursday, know your rights Zooms that we also do on Facebook Live so that thousands of people in our neighborhoods can learn how to get access to the supports that they're eligible for and how to navigate the rough stuff of this moment. So we're trying to keep the connection of love and support together in those kinds of ways.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to let each of you have some, including Brad, because he joined us late, have some sort of final summary minutes of like what's most on your mind, and people will get all kinds of advocacy actions that they can take after this. But if you want to just reiterate the thing you most would like people to do, besides understand the picture of the immigrant for the immigrant community, go at it. Nuala?
So I want to make sure that our immigrants' neighbors know that we're here for them, that we support them, and that we're not going to let them fall off in this pandemic, that the city will come through and will help them, that we as neighbors we're going to come and help them, and that they can't give up hope, because I think once you give up hope, it gets so much more dire. And the fact that food insecurity is here now means that we all need to step up our game as individuals, as neighbors, as organizations like Make the Road, but the city as well. And I'd love to see the city implement some kind of pandemic food stamp program for immigrant neighbors. We give direct cash to the immigrants so they can go shopping for their own families, so they can take care of their families, because there's honor in taking care of your families, and we must help them do that.
Thank you very, very much. Deb?
One of our members filled me with inspiration the other day, and she has a lot of underlying health conditions and was hit really hard with the coronavirus. And we were trying to keep tabs on her, and she had almost 104-degree fever, but not quite, and she could barely breathe. And we were trying to get her food, And it was horrifying. And then in the middle of it all, she texted me and she said, Deb, if I didn't die when they disappeared me in my home country, and I didn't die when I had cancer, I'm not dying on you now. And she did make it. She pulled through. And so, you know, even though it's horrifying and repulsive that white supremacists have controlled Congress and excluded our people are amazing and resilient and beautiful, loving folks. And we appreciate all of you standing with them as well.
That's beautiful. And Brad and I will do we're never going to run out of New York City issues, but in 2 or 3 weeks, we will do a story about what is happening in some of the other countries, which has finally now begun to make the awareness of at least the New York Times, which has several articles today. But I do a great deal of work still around the world, and I work in countries in which more people have cell phones than have access to soap and water. So, but we know what's going to happen when the virus hits some of those places. Brad, a summary as to
So I wasn't at the beginning, so I didn't get to kvel about Make the Road. So I'm going to do that for just a minute because, I mean, long before this crisis, but with a spotlight, you know, we talk about the ways the crisis kind of shines a bright spotlight, and so often that is on just crushing, heartbreaking inequality and grief. That story Deb just told, but she on the last Zoom I was on with her talking about families who couldn't even find their loved ones, their bodies in between the hospital and the morgue. And as Nuala says, then wouldn't have had money to bury them anyway. But the work that Make the Road does, which manages, you know, to, like, we see it when it becomes, you know, advocacy on big issues, you know, demanding, it's like nobody else than Make the Road that could be putting a statewide campaign together for $3.5 billion for immigrants. But you get a chance to go meet their members and see what they're doing in the community organizations, like they really build it from the ground up by like helping people find dignity in organizing together with each other and telling their stories, both about what's brutally unfair, but also the triumphs in their life and the joys and beauties of them, and like building shared solidarity in these spaces. And it is the only kind of organizing that I think really gives us a chance to comprehend like the magnitude of the grief and suffering and build from it to something more beautiful and powerful. So if you don't already know Make the Road, you should know them and you should be a supporter of theirs right now in the crisis, but in general. And I think, you know, Deb and I have worked together a long time now, and a lot of that work is the building blocks toward the bigger change that we want. Is because they were already organizing with Amazon workers on Staten Island. You never could have started that work now under these conditions. So it's all, you know, it's that kind of work. It's because they built this community work in immigrant neighborhoods that it's possible to grow from. And I think that's just like an important thing for us to remember here. There's work that you do in a crisis, but the long work of kind of building the kinds of organizations that can build power and fight for justice matters a lot, and it's good to be connected to in really, really hard times, and in other times too, because even normal times, as we know, have been really hard for a whole lot of people. So I am going to go ahead and paste in the chat and distribute if you want to sign on to the Essential Worker Bill of Rights.
Good.
There's a petition to do so. We'd love to have your support, but I'm just and Nuala also, if you go talk to folks in Jackson Heights about who is like building and doing the community organizing on the ground, who was behind a lot of the community work that welled up in support for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that you're just seeing break out as a kind of social justice organizing. That's pretty great. So thank you guys both for all that organizing. I know it's really hard to do right now, and we really, really appreciate it.
So I'm just going to wrap up by going back to the beginning. Thank you for the big shout out to Make the Road and the ongoing work they've been doing. Shout out to Nuala as like a model of somebody who steps forward, looks around her community, says, wait a minute, there is a crisis. There are good organizations, but there's more that needs to be done, and we're going to just start doing it. And the fact that in each case, these organizations have been able to attract large numbers of people who want to go out and make a difference, and who are helping their neighbors, and who are helping organize and spread the word. That is the way in which organizing for social change happens. It's exactly what Brad needs with the kind of legislative initiatives that he was talking about. And we are pleased that you're all with us and listening, and we're just going to urge you to pick up on the follow-up actions. But I'm going to remind you that one big thing you can do for us is to educate others and chat with people about what you learned and tell people how people live. Many immigrants and many undocumented immigrants live in the borough of Queens, which is, after all, part of their city. It's useful for people to learn so they can figure out what it is they ought to do. Thank you, Brad, for your ongoing work. We will always excuse you to be in a council hearing because you're moving legislation that matters to us. Tess, can you just remind people what we're doing next week, because I can't remember?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Next week, we are going to be speaking about housing and homelessness, which are obviously themes that we brought up throughout this conversation. And we're going to be diving deeper into it. But obviously, this is all connected in a really serious way. So I hope you'll join us next week to dive into that. I had one more question for Nuala. Are there any ways for people to help and support your ongoing efforts with your COVID care network? Do you need volunteers? Is it donations?
So you can go on Facebook and look up COVID Care Neighbor Network. And if you want to do financial donations, it's with Together We Can RC, which stands for Resource Center. So Together We Can RC, we accepting donations. And I think the hope here is how beautifully our communities have come together to help our immigrant neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll send that information out in the follow-up email as well, as long as some more information about donations to Make the Road if you are also inclined.
Thank you to our wonderful and growing audience. Please tell other people to join you in tuning in next Thursday at 2 o'clock. As I said at the beginning, we will find a way to continue this programming going forward for as long as we need to. And I thought I would just end, this is a little bit enigmatic, but I was talking recently with a Buddhist, a serious Buddhist, who taught me that the way to think about the pandemic is at the end of every day to say to yourself, okay, we're one day closer to the end. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth.